Oil supply across the Gulf is starting to break down. Drone strikes are hitting ships and infrastructure near the Strait of Hormuz, one of the most critical energy corridors in the world. Major facilities are already shutting down. Qatar has paused operations at the Ras Laffan LNG complex, the largest LNG plant on the planet. Saudi Arabia's Ras Tanura refinery, the kingdom's biggest, has effectively stopped running. Bahrain's refinery is burning after a missile strike, and the Fujairah port, a key oil shipping hub, is under attack. These disruptions are spreading quickly, and energy markets are reacting. What is happening around the Strait of Hormuz is now starting to hit global supply. The danger here comes from geography as much as from military power. Iran sits right next to the Strait of Hormuz and has the ability to strike ships, infrastructure, and transit routes moving through that narrow corridor. That matters because Hormuz is one of the most important energy choke points on Earth. When drone strikes keep hitting and shipping comes under pressure, the disruption spreads far beyond one battlefield. That is why producers are beginning to cut output. This is not because demand has disappeared, it is because export routes are under threat. Storage risks are rising, and nobody wants crude piling up with nowhere safe to send it. Some might think the Gulf states can simply reroute volumes through the Red Sea, but that is not realistic at this scale. The infrastructure there is not large enough to absorb real global volumes from the Gulf. So once Hormuz comes under sustained pressure, producers are forced to slow down. The cuts are already starting to add up. Kuwait has reduced refinery operations by 600,000 barrels per day. If that turns into a full shutdown, another 2 million barrels per day could disappear. Across the wider region, by the middle of March, just 4 days away, total disruption could reach 4 million barrels per day. That is a major global supply shock in a market that does not have much room for error. Oil prices are already reacting. Crude is up more than 30%, and if these shutdowns continue, prices could move above $100 a barrel and stay there for some time. Once the market believes these losses will last for weeks or months, the damage spreads quickly into inflation, freight, manufacturing, and government finances. And that is where this story gets even bigger, because control over energy flows is now turning into leverage over the global economy itself. What makes this crisis even more important is that the Strait of Hormuz is not fully closed to everyone in the same way. Iran is being selective. Certain tankers are still being allowed through, especially if they are labeled as Chinese vessels. That means this is no longer just a broad shipping disruption. It is becoming a tool of geopolitical control. In practical terms, Chinese-linked ships are still able to move through Hormuz, load Iranian oil, and send it back to China for refining. So while many buyers face growing disruption, China continues to receive discounted Iranian energy. That changes the whole picture. It means Tehran is still bringing in money through oil sales, and it means Beijing is still getting access to cheaper energy at a time when the rest of the market is tightening. That creates two very important consequences. First, China is indirectly helping keep Iran funded during the conflict by continuing to buy its oil. Second, China protects its own industrial base by keeping part of its energy supply cheaper than it otherwise would be in a market where crude is already surging. When oil is rising and LNG markets are tightening, access to discounted barrels becomes a major economic advantage.
Wiped out their Navy, 44 ships. We've wiped out their Air Force, every plane. We've wiped out most of their missiles. You see, the missiles aren't coming much anymore. We've also hit their manufacturing areas where they make the missiles very hard. Their drone capacity is way down.
And that is why Washington is now turning to pressure. Scott Bessent is openly asking China to reduce its purchases of Iranian oil and Russian oil. The message coming from Washington is clear. Stop buying cheap sanctioned energy and buy more from the United States instead. In other words, China is being pushed to replace discounted Iranian and Russian supply with higher-priced American crude and LNG exports. From Beijing's perspective, that request makes very little sense. China is the largest crude importer in the world. Its manufacturing economy depends on stable and affordable energy. Choosing to abandon cheaper supply in the middle of a global energy shock would mean taking higher input costs across industry, trade, and exports. It would mean helping Washington contain a crisis that Washington helped create, while damaging China's own competitive position in the process. And once that logic becomes clear, the focus shifts to a much bigger question. Who is going to carry the financial cost of this war? That cost is already starting to build fast. The military side gets most of the attention, but the financial side is getting heavier by the day. The United States has already spent more than $600 million just to reposition forces in the Middle East. And that is before counting the full cost of combat, interception, logistics, fuel, repairs, and replacements. There are also direct losses that are becoming harder to ignore. F-35 fighter jets that were shot down cost $350 million. By March 2nd, the total bill for the conflict had already reached $5 billion. If the fighting has continued at the same pace, that number could now be anywhere from $10 billion to $20 billion. Those are not minor wartime expenses. That is a fast-rising burden that has to be financed somehow. The deeper problem is the imbalance between what is being fired and what is being stopped. The United States is using interceptors that can cost millions of dollars each to destroy drones that may cost only around $10,000. That kind of cost exchange becomes punishing over time. Even if the military succeeds tactically, the financial math gets worse with every round. A campaign built on that structure becomes extremely expensive very quickly. And the bill does not stop with the current fighting. The stockpiles being used up now will have to be rebuilt later. Replacing depleted missiles and munitions could require another $50 billion. That means the real cost of this war is not limited to what has already been spent. It also includes the replacement cycle that comes after. Once spending rises this fast, the strain moves into the financial system. Investors start asking where the money will come from, how much debt will be issued, and what price the government will have to pay to keep funding the fight. That is where the conflict begins to spill out of the region and into bond markets, inflation expectations, and the dollar itself. The impact does not stop at the oil chart. Once crude jumps by more than 30%, the shock starts spreading through the whole economy. Energy sits inside almost everything. It affects transport, shipping, manufacturing, farming, packaging, electricity, and the cost of moving goods across borders. So when oil surges this fast, the inflation effect does not stay limited to fuel. It starts moving through food prices, industrial costs, and consumer prices more broadly. That is where the financial stress begins to build. If companies are paying more for fuel, freight, and inputs, they either absorb the cost and lose margin or pass it on. Either way, inflation expectations start moving higher. Markets understand this quickly. Investors know that a sustained oil shock can keep price pressure alive far longer than central banks want. And once that happens, bond investors begin demanding higher yields to compensate for that inflation risk. This is already showing up in shorter-term treasury debt, where investors are asking for higher returns. That matters because the government does not finance itself in a vacuum. If Washington needs to spend more on war at the same time energy prices are pushing inflation higher, then any new borrowing becomes more expensive. The Treasury can still issue bonds, and there will still be buyers, but the price of that funding starts rising against the government. That leaves policymakers stuck in a very uncomfortable position. They can borrow more, but that means paying higher yields into a market that is already turning more cautious. Or the Federal Reserve can step in more aggressively, but printing money into a war-driven inflation shock would put even more pressure on the dollar and raise fears of devaluation. Neither option comes cheap. So this becomes a double squeeze very quickly. War spending is rising, borrowing costs are rising, and both are feeding into each other while the oil shock keeps pushing inflation through the system. Once markets see that combination clearly, attention starts shifting to another weak spot, one that sits deeper in the industrial base, and that is where China's control over strategic minerals starts to matter in a much bigger way. That leverage is substantial. The United States imports at least 80% of its rare earth elements from China. For some critical minerals, that dependency rises above 95%. These are not minor industrial inputs. They are essential materials used in advanced defense systems, electronics, guidance components, propulsion systems, and high-performance military hardware. The scale of that dependence becomes clearer when you look at the weapons themselves. An F-35 fighter jet requires more than 400 kilo of rare earth materials. A U.S. Navy destroyer uses more than 5,000 lb of rare earth metals, including materials such as yttrium and samarium. A Virginia-class submarine needs nearly $10,000 lb, and that is before counting the critical materials used in bombs, missiles, interceptors, radar systems, and other equipment being consumed during the war. That creates a very direct vulnerability. If China decides to restrict or halt rare earth exports, the pressure would hit far beyond one factory or one weapons line. It could slow the production of missiles, aircraft, and advanced military systems across the defense industry. It could also push up costs very quickly. A missile that costs $4 million today could rise to $5 million, $6 million, or even $8 million if supply chains tighten and key inputs become harder to secure. That means China does not need to enter the conflict directly to raise the cost of the war for Washington. It can do that by tightening access to the materials that make modern military systems possible. But China's leverage does not stop at the defense supply chain. It is also showing up in global finance, treasury demand, and the future role of the dollar. Even with the war escalating, China is not moving closer to Washington financially. It is moving the other way. Beijing is continuing to reduce its holdings of U.S. Treasury bonds, bringing them closer to $680 billion. That matters because treasuries have long been one of the main ways the United States funds itself at scale. When one of the biggest foreign holders keeps stepping back, the signal is hard to ignore. At the same time, China is proving it can still attract global capital in dollars on its own terms. In November, it issued $4 billion in US dollar bonds at a 3.62% coupon rate, roughly in line with US Treasury borrowing costs. Demand was extremely strong, with the issue oversubscribed nearly 30 times. Investors were willing to buy dollar bonds from China instead of sending all that money into US government debt. That tells you a lot about how reserve managers and global funds are thinking.
Somebody said, how would you score it from 0 to 10? I said, I'd give it a 12 to a 15. Their army is gone. They're just about, look, their navy is gone. Their communications are gone. Their leaders are gone. 2 sets of their leaders are gone. They're down to their 3rd set. Their air force is wiped out entirely. Think of it. They have 32 ships. All 32 are at the bottom of the ocean. Other than that, they're doing very well, Coach. Very well. We're doing, our military is doing phenomenally.
China is also continuing to build its position in gold. In just 1 month, it added another 30,000 troy ounces, bringing total holdings to 74.2 million ounces. At the same time, gold is trading above $5,000. Every dollar that goes into gold or into Chinese-issued dollar bonds is money that does not go into financing Washington. And as more countries watch war, inflation pressure, and rising U.S. borrowing needs all at once, the incentive to diversify only gets stronger. The question now is how far this goes. Energy flows are tightening, war costs are rising, and pressure is building across the financial system. Will China abandon Iranian oil and help stabilize Washington's position, or will it keep moving away from the dollar and accelerate a broader shift in global power? Let me know what you think in the comments, and please support the channel with your likes and share the video. See you in the next one.